Imagine waking up tomorrow to discover that practically every road leading out of your city is now being monitored. There is no invasion, there is no war, no soldier has crossed your borders. But every port, every airport, and every major route is now being watched by someone. You are still free to leave, but you know that any movement will be tracked. Now, imagine this situation playing out not with a single city, but with a powerhouse of nearly 1.5 billion people. That is precisely how many Chinese strategists view the United States' presence in the Indo-Pacific. For decades, Washington has built a vast network of military bases, alliances, joint exercises, and naval deployments surrounding China. For the United States, it is about preserving regional stability, protecting allies, and ensuring freedom of navigation. For Beijing, however, this same structure represents an attempt to curb its expansion and diminish its international influence. Remarkably, all of this has unfolded without a single shot being fired between the two powers. But how did this strategy come about? How did a dispute that began shortly after World War II evolve into the focal point of 21st century international politics? And why are virtually all of Asia's major economies involved in this story? Today, on Vector 1, we explore how the United States created one of the most sophisticated strategic architectures in modern history. When it all began. To understand the present, we need to go back more than 80 years. In 1945, World War II was coming to an end. Germany had been defeated. Japan was surrendering following Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Much of Europe lay in ruins. But while various countries needed to rebuild their cities, the United States emerged from the war as the planet's leading economic and military power. At the same time, a new rivalry was beginning. On one side, Washington. On the other, Moscow. The Cold War was born. During this period, the primary American objective was to prevent the Soviet Union from expanding its influence. In Europe, NATO would emerge. In Asia, however, the strategy would be different. Instead of forming a single large alliance, Washington began forging individual agreements with countries deemed strategic. Japan became one of these pillars. Then came South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, and other partners. At the time, no one imagined that this network of alliances would still exist decades later, much less that it would come to play a completely different role. Because at that moment, China was not yet the major American concern. In fact, for much of the second half of the 20th century, the country faced enormous internal challenges. Its economy was limited, its industry was still in its infancy, its navy had limited reach, its international influence was minimal compared to the major powers. But that was about to change in a dramatic way. The Quiet Rise. In 1978, China initiated profound economic reforms. The government began opening the door to foreign investment. International companies started setting up factories in the country. Industrial production grew at a rapid pace. Year after year, decade after decade, millions of people lifted themselves out of poverty. New cities sprang up practically from scratch. Gigantic ports were built. Highways spanned entire regions. Universities began producing engineers at an unprecedented rate. In just a few decades, China transformed from a regional economy into a global power. It began producing electronics, automobiles, ships, industrial equipment, and later, advanced technologies. This growth completely transformed the global balance of power. In the early 2000s, many believed that a China economically integrated with the rest of the world would also become a strategic partner to the West. But as its wealth grew, so did its military capabilities. That was when Washington realized the landscape had changed. A shift in focus. For years, the Chinese Navy's primary mission was to defend its coastline. Today, its ambition is far greater. The country has built modern destroyers. It has invested in nuclear submarines. It has developed aircraft carriers. It has created missiles capable of striking ships hundreds of kilometers away. It has expanded its Coast Guard. It has modernized its Air Force. And it has significantly increased its investment in military research. At the same time, Beijing began laying claim to strategic areas of the South China Sea and stepped up its presence in regions considered sensitive by the United States and its allies. This did not mean that war was inevitable, but it signaled that the competition between the planet's two largest economies was entering a new phase. The question was no longer whether China would become a major power. It already had. The issue was something else. How could this new power be prevented from completely altering the strategic balance of the Indo-Pacific? The American response was not to build a new wall, nor was it to start a war. It lay in the map, and few places on the planet possess a geography as significant as this region. There is a chain of islands stretching from Japan to Southeast Asia. At first glance, they appear to be nothing more than territories scattered across the ocean. But to military strategists, they function as veritable natural gateways. Whoever controls these passages can monitor virtually all naval movement off the Chinese coast, and it was precisely there that one of the most sophisticated strategies in modern geopolitics began. The geography that changed global strategy opened a map of Asia. At first glance, it looks like nothing more than a vast coastline bordering the Pacific Ocean. But when viewed by a military strategist, that map reveals something entirely different. The Chinese coast lacks free access to the open ocean. Between China and the Pacific lies a nearly continuous chain of islands. It begins in Japan. It passes through Okinawa. It runs through Taiwan. It continues through the Philippines, and it ends at the islands of Indonesia. This formation became known as the First Island Chain. It was not created by engineers. It was not built during a war. It had simply always been there. For centuries, its importance went virtually unnoticed. But in the 20th century, everything changed. With the advent of aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, long-range radar, and anti-ship missiles, this island chain began to function as a massive natural barrier. Imagine a river. Now imagine that every vessel wishing to cross it must pass through one of a few bridges. Whoever controls those bridges can monitor virtually all movement. At sea, the principle is similar. A large number of Chinese ships must navigate relatively narrow straits to reach the Pacific. These maritime corridors have become some of the most strategic locations on the planet. The gateways to the Pacific. The Miyako Strait lies between Okinawa and Taiwan. Further south, the channels between Taiwan and the Philippines appear. Then come the various passages through the Philippine archipelago. These corridors are constantly used by commercial vessels, but they also hold immense military importance. Whenever a Chinese naval group crosses these areas heading toward the Pacific, it can be tracked by satellites, patrol aircraft, submarines, or ships from other countries. This does not mean the United States can automatically block passage. Chinese ships have the right to navigate international waters under the law of the sea, but from a strategic standpoint, entering the Pacific undetected has become much more difficult. That is precisely why Beijing is investing heavily in quieter submarines, electronic warfare, its own satellites, and the capability to operate beyond this First Island Chain. The First Island Chain. During the Cold War, American strategists realized that this chain of islands could serve as a natural containment line. There was no need to build gigantic fortresses. The countries in the region already occupied extremely favorable positions. Through military alliances, technological cooperation, and a naval presence, Washington established a surveillance network, distributed along this geographic arc. The result was a security architecture that remains active to this day. There is no physical wall. Instead, there is a combination of sensors, radars, aircraft, satellites, ships, submarines, and military bases spread across hundreds of kilometers. It is an invisible wall, much harder to see, but extremely efficient at monitoring military movements. Okinawa, the centerpiece. Among all these points, one deserves special attention: Okinawa. Although part of Japan, this small island hosts one of the largest concentrations of U.S. forces outside the United States. Fighter jets, helicopters, ships, marines, logistics centers, air defense systems. All of this is located just a few hundred kilometers from the Chinese coast. For Washington, Okinawa allows for a rapid response to crises in Taiwan, the South China Sea, and the East China Sea. For Beijing, however, this presence represents a permanent military power projection capability, very close to Chinese territory. This difference in perception explains why any movement in the region tends to trigger harsh statements from both sides. The second island chain, but the U.S. strategy does not end at the first line. There is a second layer, known as the second island chain. It runs through Guam, the Mariana Islands, and other strategic positions further from the Chinese coast. Guam, for example, serves as a massive U.S. forward base in the Pacific. Stationed there are strategic bombers, nuclear submarines, ammunition depots, and infrastructure capable of sustaining operations for extended periods. Even if certain bases near the mainland were struck in a conflict, Guam would continue to play a fundamental role in supporting U.S. forces. This strategic depth reduces reliance on a single point and enhances response capabilities. Satellites, the new surveillance line, for decades controlling the sea, relied primarily on ships. Today, space is also part of this contest. Observation satellites can track movements at ports, air bases, and major military installations. Some capture optical images, others use radar, capable of operating at night or under cloud cover. Furthermore, maritime patrol aircraft and drones further expand monitoring capabilities. In practice, this means that large-scale military movements are much harder to conceal than in the past. Of course, no technology is perfect. There are limitations, countermeasures, and ways to reduce detectability. But the volume of information available today has completely transformed the way major powers monitor one another. Freedom of navigation. There is yet another important element. The United States regularly conducts operations known as Freedom of Navigation Operations, or FONOPs. In these missions, U.S. vessels transit through maritime areas where Washington considers international law to guarantee freedom of navigation. The stated objective is to challenge maritime claims deemed excessive and to reaffirm principles of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, even though the U.S. has not ratified that convention. China, for its part, frequently protests against these operations, asserting that they heighten tensions and interfere with matters concerning its sovereignty and security. These patrols illustrate how the same action can be interpreted in completely different ways by the parties involved. But no strategy works in isolation. Military bases do not operate in a vacuum. Ships need ports, aircraft need runways, information must be shared, and above all, one needs partners willing to cooperate. That is how the United States built one of the largest military alliance networks in modern history. Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, India. No superpower wins alone. If there is one lesson history has taught American strategists, it is that no power can maintain global influence entirely on its own. Military bases are important. Ships are important. Technology is too. But there is an even more decisive factor: allies. For over 70 years, the United States has built an extensive network of partnerships across Asia and the Pacific. Unlike NATO, where dozens of countries belong to a single organization, the strategy in the Indo-Pacific was different. Washington forged individual agreements. Each country plays a specific role. Each location holds a different level of importance. Together, these alliances create a structure that covers virtually the entire Chinese coastline. Japan. The most important ally in Asia, few countries share as close a relationship with the United States as Japan. After World War II, the country adopted a pacifist constitution. For decades, its self-defense forces focused primarily on protecting national territory. Meanwhile, thousands of U.S. troops remained stationed on Japanese soil. Today, there are dozens of facilities used by the United States. The best-known one is in Okinawa. But it is not the only one. There are air bases, naval bases, logistics centers, missile defense systems, intelligence infrastructure. All of this makes Japan a cornerstone of the U.S. presence in the Pacific. In recent years, however, Tokyo has begun to shift its stance. The Japanese government has announced significant increases in defense spending. It has invested in new long-range missiles. It has expanded technological cooperation with Washington. And it has begun to discuss regional security challenges more openly. According to Japanese officials, these measures reflect a more complex strategic environment. Beijing, on the other hand, frequently criticizes this military buildup, claiming it contributes to rising tensions in the region. South Korea, far more than just North Korea. When South Korea is mentioned, the first image that usually comes to mind is its border with North Korea, and that makes sense. The two countries have technically remained at war since 1953, but there's another important factor: its geographic location. South Korea is situated between China, Japan, and Russia. This makes it a strategic asset of immense value. The United States maintains tens of thousands of troops in the country. Furthermore, joint military exercises take place regularly. Officially, the primary objective of these activities is to strengthen defense capabilities against North Korean threats. However, the existing infrastructure also enhances the U.S. capacity to operate in other situations across the Indo-Pacific. This characteristic makes South Korea a key element of the regional security architecture. The Philippines, the return of a historic ally. If there is one country whose importance has grown rapidly in recent years, it is the Philippines. For part of the last decade, military cooperation between Manila and Washington went through a period of uncertainty. However, political changes and rising tensions in the South China Sea have led both countries to strengthen this partnership once again. New agreements have allowed the United States to expand its access to Philippine military facilities. Some of these facilities are located relatively close to Taiwan. Others face the South China Sea. This reduces the time required to deploy aircraft, equipment, and support personnel. At the same time, the Philippines states that it seeks to strengthen its own defense capabilities and protect its maritime interests. Meanwhile, China criticizes the increased U.S. military presence near its territory. Beijing closely monitors every new agreement between Manila and Washington. Australia, much more than a distant ally. At first glance, Australia appears far removed from major flashpoints. Yet, strategically, it occupies a vitally important position. Its territory offers logistical depth, vast training areas, modern infrastructure, ports, air bases, and direct access to the Indian Ocean. In recent years, military cooperation between Australia and the United States has increased significantly. The rotational presence of U.S. forces has been expanded. Joint exercises have become more frequent, and new defense investments have begun transforming Northern Australia into a key strategic platform. AUKUS, an agreement that caught the world's attention. In 2021, 3 countries announced a partnership that surprised many analysts. The United States, the United Kingdom, Australia. AUKUS was born. The best-known aspect of the agreement involves the future transfer of nuclear-powered submarine technology to Australia. These submarines will not carry nuclear weapons. The key feature lies in their propulsion. They can remain submerged for much longer periods and operate over vast distances, without the need for frequent refueling. Furthermore, AUKUS also provides for cooperation in areas such as artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, undersea technologies, autonomous systems, and advanced computing. Washington and Canberra present the partnership as a way to strengthen stability and deterrence capabilities in the region. China, however, claims that initiatives of this kind could fuel an arms race and increase the risk of confrontation. The Quad. The alliance that isn't an alliance. There is another group that frequently comes up in discussions about the Indo-Pacific. The Quad, comprising the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. Unlike NATO, the Quad lacks collective defense clauses, nor does it have a unified military command. Its focus is broader. The countries cooperate on issues such as infrastructure, maritime security, technology, supply chains, cybersecurity, and disaster response. Even so, many analysts believe this alignment strengthens strategic coordination among key democracies in the region. India's participation is noteworthy. Although it maintains a relatively independent foreign policy, New Delhi also faces border disputes with China. This creates shared interests in certain areas without turning the Quad into a formal military alliance. Far beyond soldiers. When we imagine a clash between major powers, we usually think of tanks, ships, fighter jets, missiles. But the true power of these alliances extends far beyond a military presence. Intelligence sharing, satellites, joint research, sensitive technologies, undersea cables, semiconductors, energy, trade. All these areas have become part of the strategic competition. In other words, the encirclement doesn't just play out on a map. It also takes place in the economy, in technology, in industry, in innovation. And that is precisely what makes this rivalry so different from the Cold War of the last century. The island that is worth more than it looks. Take another look at a map of Asia. Between the Chinese coast and the Pacific Ocean lies a relatively small island. It covers an area of about 36,000 square kilometers. It is smaller than many Brazilian states. Its population is around 23 million. At first glance, it looks like just another Pacific island. But for military strategists, economists, and world leaders, Taiwan has become one of the most important places on the planet. For a simple reason. It accounts for a significant share of global production of the most advanced semiconductors. Without these tiny components, there would be no modern cell phones, computers, artificial intelligence, electric cars, satellites, fifth-generation fighter jets, guided missiles, or much of the equipment used in daily life. In other words, a large part of the digital economy depends on an island located just over 150 kilometers from the Chinese coast, and this makes Taiwan much more than just a territorial issue. It represents a central piece of the global economy. How did Taiwan get to this point? To understand this importance, we need to go back a few decades. After the Chinese Civil War in 1949, the Communist Party took control of the mainland and founded the People's Republic of China. The government of the Republic of China, led by Chiang Kai-shek, retreated to Taiwan. Since then, both sides have claimed legitimacy over China. Over the decades, most countries came to diplomatically recognize the People's Republic of China, based in Beijing. At the same time, many maintained economic and unofficial relations with Taiwan. This delicate balance became known as the One China policy, although different countries interpret this policy in different ways. Beijing considers Taiwan an inseparable part of Chinese territory and declares that it prefers peaceful reunification, but does not rule out the use of force under certain circumstances. Taiwan, meanwhile, is home to various political currents with differing stances on identity, autonomy, and relations with the mainland. The United States, for its part, maintains a policy known as strategic ambiguity. Washington diplomatically recognizes Beijing, but also supplies defensive equipment to Taiwan and asserts an interest in maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. This combination creates one of the world's most complex diplomatic scenarios, the world's factory. But there is another reason why Taiwan attracts so much attention. The company TSMC. You may never have heard the name, but you likely use products that rely on it every day. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company has become the global leader in advanced chip manufacturing. Companies such as Apple, Nvidia, AMD, Qualcomm, and many others depend on its production capacity. Even components used by defense sectors in various countries are manufactured using technologies developed in Taiwan. Building a facility of this caliber requires tens of billions of dollars, years of development, and a highly specialized supply chain. It is not something that can be quickly replicated. Consequently, any significant disruption to Taiwanese production would have global repercussions. During the COVID-19 pandemic, for instance, a semiconductor shortage affected the automotive industry, electronics manufacturers, and numerous other sectors. That episode demonstrated the vulnerability of the global supply chain, the Taiwan Strait separating. Taiwan, from the mainland, is a stretch of water known as the Taiwan Strait. At its narrowest point, it spans approximately 130 kilometers. From a military perspective, this distance presents a massive challenge. A large-scale amphibious operation would require extremely complex coordination. It would involve ships, aircraft, logistics, air cover, troop transport, and the maintenance of supply lines. For this reason, many experts believe that any attempted invasion would rank among the most difficult military operations in modern history. At the same time, Beijing has been expanding military exercises around the island, including naval and air operations. According to the Chinese officials, these activities are for training and defense purposes. However, Taiwan and various foreign governments maintain that they increase military pressure and raise the risk of incidents. Far beyond Taiwan, but there is another area where this dispute is intensifying: the South China Sea, an area that, at first glance, appears to be just a vast expanse of water. In reality, it serves as one of the main arteries of global trade. Trillions of dollars worth of goods are estimated to pass through this region every year. Oil, natural gas, electronics, food, raw materials, manufactured goods. So far, we have seen how the United States has strengthened alliances, expanded its military presence, and supported strategic partners surrounding China. But Beijing has not stood idly by. While Washington expanded its network of alliances, China invested billions of dollars to reduce its vulnerability. It modernized its navy. It developed missiles capable of striking aircraft carriers. It built one of the world's largest coast guards. It created new trade routes. And it launched an infrastructure project spanning dozens of countries. Instead of accepting encirclement, it decided to build its own strategy. Beijing did not stand still. For a long time, many Western analysts believed that American military superiority in the Pacific would remain virtually unchallenged. The United States possessed the largest navy on the planet. It controlled bases scattered across the region. It had aircraft carriers capable of operating in practically any ocean, and it relied on an extensive network of allies. But while international attention was focused on wars in the Middle East and the fight against terrorism following the 9/11 attacks, another transformation was quietly taking place. Year after year, China invested billions of dollars in modernizing its armed forces, without major announcements, without direct confrontations, without challenging every American move. Beijing was pursuing a long-term strategy. It did not seek to match the United States in every aspect. It sought to develop capabilities that would hinder, or make more costly, a military intervention near Chinese territory. It was a profound shift in doctrine, the anti-access strategy. Military experts began using a specific term to define this approach: anti-access area denial, often abbreviated as A2AD. The idea is relatively simple. Instead of trying to control all the world's seas, the goal was to impede the entry and operation of adversary forces in regions considered strategic. In practice, this meant massive investments in radar systems, air defense systems, submarines, long-range missiles, electronic warfare, satellites, drones, and intelligence capabilities. For Chinese strategists, the greater the risk to foreign forces operating near the coast, the lower the likelihood of a military intervention. The carrier killers. Perhaps no piece of equipment symbolizes this shift quite like anti-ship ballistic missiles. Among them, one of the best known is the DF-21D, dubbed by some analysts a carrier killer. The concept behind this system is to strike large, moving vessels hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. In practice, this mission is extremely complex. Simply possessing a missile is not enough. One must locate the target, track its movement, transmit this information rapidly, and keep this entire chain functioning even in the face of electronic interference. Therefore, while these systems pose a significant strategic challenge, their effectiveness in actual combat against a modern carrier strike group remains a subject of debate among experts. Even so, they have forced U.S. military planners to rethink concepts used for decades. A new navy. While developing new missiles, China was also rapidly expanding its fleet. Shipyards were working at a feverish pace. New destroyers were being launched. Modern frigates were entering service. Conventional and nuclear submarines were being commissioned. Amphibious ships were increasing troop transport capacity, and new aircraft carriers were joining the People's Liberation Army Navy. Today, China possesses one of the world's largest navies in terms of the number of vessels. This does not necessarily imply superiority in overall capability, operational experience, or power projection. Areas where many experts still see significant advantages for the United States. But it does demonstrate that Beijing has made its maritime presence a top priority. The ocean is no longer merely a frontier. It has become a central element of national strategy. The Coast Guard. Interestingly, not all of this expansion occurred through the Navy. The Chinese Coast Guard also grew significantly. Many of its ships are similar in size to military vessels. They patrol disputed areas. They protect Chinese fishing vessels. They monitor maritime activities. And they reinforce Beijing's presence in regions where territorial disputes remain unresolved. This approach creates a peculiar situation. Many interactions take place between Coast Guard vessels rather than warships. This reduces the risk of immediate escalation, but also gives rise to new diplomatic and legal challenges. The new Silk Road. But perhaps China's most ambitious response did not occur in the military realm. It took place in the economy. In 2013, Beijing launched the Belt and Road Initiative. The project entails investments in ports, railways, highways, pipelines, and other infrastructure across dozens of countries. According to the Chinese government, the goal is to enhance connectivity, facilitate trade, and promote economic development. Critics, however, argue that some projects could increase the financial dependence of certain countries and expand Beijing's strategic influence. For decades, the rivalry between major powers was measured by the number of tanks, aircraft, and ships. Today, it is also measured by the capacity to produce chips, control supply chains, and develop artificial intelligence. But one question remains unanswered. After so many investments, alliances, and displays of strength, are we heading toward a new Cold War, or has the world found a different way to compete without escalating to direct confrontation? Are we living through a new Cold War? Throughout this documentary, we have seen how a dispute that began decades ago evolved into one of the greatest strategic competitions in modern history. But one question remains. Are we heading toward a new Cold War? The answer depends on how we define that term. During the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, the world was divided into two major blocks. There was little economic integration, little trade, little technological interdependence. Today, the landscape is completely different. The United States and China compete in various areas, but at the same time, they remain deeply connected. Thousands of American companies operate in China. Chinese companies do business on virtually every continent. Global production chains depend on both countries. Investors monitor their economies daily. Financial markets react almost instantly to decisions made in Washington and Beijing. This interdependence creates a paradox. The greater the competition, the higher the potential cost of a direct confrontation. The economy as a battlefield. For much of the 20th century, wars were fought primarily with tanks, aircraft, and soldiers. In the 21st century, they also play out through the economy. Sanctions, tariffs, technological restrictions, control over strategic minerals, disputes over supply chains, competition in artificial intelligence, semiconductors, quantum computing. All of this has become part of the rivalry between the planet's two largest economies. In many cases, a trade decision produces effects just as significant as a show of military force. That is why many analysts describe the current rivalry as a multi-dimensional competition. It plays out at sea, in space, on the internet, in universities, in corporations, and even inside the factories responsible for the world's most advanced components. The Taiwan factor. Despite this broad competition, one issue remains the focus of the greatest international concern: Taiwan. Many experts believe that a potential conflict involving the island would have consequences far greater than those of recent regional disputes. This is not solely due to military considerations. The global economy would also be profoundly affected. Shipping routes could face disruptions. Financial markets would react immediately. Advanced semiconductor production could face serious difficulties. Various countries would face pressure to make complex diplomatic decisions. Precisely because of these risks, many governments state that they seek to preserve the current balance and avoid changes brought about by force. At the same time, Beijing continues to declare that reunification is a national goal. Washington reaffirms its interest in regional stability. Taiwan strengthens its defense capabilities, and allies monitor every move with extreme attention. This delicate balance is often described as a form of mutual deterrence. Each side seeks to demonstrate sufficient capability to discourage actions deemed unacceptable by the other. The race for technology. But perhaps the true battlefield of the 21st century is not even on the ocean. It may lie within laboratories. Whoever leads in areas such as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, robotics, satellites, biotechnology, and semiconductors will be able to influence the economy, security, and innovation for decades. That is why billions of dollars are invested annually in research and development. Universities, private companies, government agencies all compete for knowledge. Unlike the wars of the past, this contest is unlikely to be won simply by the largest army. It will also depend on who can innovate the fastest. The Indo-Pacific has changed forever. Regardless of what happens in the coming decades, a transformation has already taken place. The center of international politics is no longer located exclusively in the Atlantic. Today, the Indo-Pacific occupies a central position in the strategies of major powers. It is home to some of the planet's busiest shipping routes, major industrial hubs, key semiconductor production centers, large consumer markets, and a significant portion of the global population. Any change in this region has impacts that extend far beyond Asia. It influences prices, investments, technology, energy, trade, and international security. So, has the United States encircled China? We return to the question that sparked this documentary. Has the United States really encircled China without firing a shot? The answer depends on the perspective one takes. From the American point of view, the network of alliances built over recent decades seeks to preserve regional stability, protect partners, and ensure freedom of navigation. From the Chinese perspective, this same network limits its strategic freedom, increases military pressure near its territory, and hinders its power projection. Both interpretations coexist in the international debate. There is a broad consensus among experts that this architecture of alliances, military bases, and naval presence profoundly shapes the strategic balance of the Indo-Pacific. It does not prevent China from developing, but it influences how Beijing plans its security and military capabilities. At the same time, China has responded by strengthening its navy, investing in advanced technologies, expanding its global economic presence, and seeking to reduce vulnerabilities. In other words, we are not looking at a game where only one side makes moves. We are witnessing two major powers continuously adjusting their strategies in response to each other's actions. Conclusion: for much of history, empires fought over territory. Today, the biggest disputes involve information, technology, influence, the economy, and control over strategic routes. Perhaps the most important conflict of the 21st century will never be remembered for a single great battle. Perhaps it will be remembered for decisions made in boardrooms, research centers, parliaments, shipyards, and laboratories. Because, sometimes, the most important wars do not begin with explosions. They begin with alliances, with investments, with innovation, and with strategic choices made long before the first shot is fired. If you have made it this far, you have likely realized that geopolitics goes far beyond the headlines. Every military base, every port, every satellite, every diplomatic agreement, every new chip produced, it is all part of a much larger chessboard. And understanding that board means understanding how the world works. And so concludes another chapter in one of the most significant geopolitical rivalries of the 21st century. It is a rivalry played out not only with ships, aircraft, or missiles, but also through technology, economics, diplomacy, and global influence. As the world watches every move made by these two powers, one thing is certain: the decisions made today will shape the international balance of power for decades to come. At Vector One, our goal is to help you understand these decisions before they become tomorrow's headlines. If this documentary offered a fresh perspective on the topic, please hit the like button. It helps YouTube recommend this content to more people interested in geopolitics, strategy, and history. Share this video with others who want to understand the world beyond the headlines. And join the conversation by leaving your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe this rivalry will continue to be resolved through diplomacy? Or are we heading toward an increasingly direct confrontation between the United States and China? If you aren't part of our community yet, subscribe to Vector One and turn on notifications. Because here, every documentary goes beyond the events themselves. We reveal the strategy behind them. See you in the next video.